Hi there, I'm Keenan Fry, and you're watching the Acid Drip. Okay, I've got the occluder off, and we are back. So we're going to talk about some helpful hints. As I said earlier, contrary to popular belief, the neutral can shock you. This is called backfeeding. So if you hear an electrician say this is backfeeding, that's a pretty good warning sign not to mess with that receptacle. I've mentioned several times the term bootstrapping. That's a way to kind of slap chop things and do a shoddy job. But we're now going to talk about, okay, so the hammer trick. I have a standard American hammer in my hand. Now, a standard American hammer is 14 to 18 inches. So from half to head, this is 14 inches. So if I hold this between my hands, I have 14 inches of space between my hands. Now, according to the ADA, that is the American Disabilities Act, all wall receptacles need to be a minimum of 14 to 18 inches off of the ground. So here's the deal, the hammer trick. Take a hammer, turn it upside down so that its head is pointed downwards and the haft is pointed upwards. This is so it balances. Now I'm going to put the hammer on the floor and move out of the way, and what you will be able to see is that the hammer will, roughly speaking, line up with the receptacle. So the receptacle just needs to be 14 inches off the ground, and the top of the receptacle is above the haft of the hammer, which means this receptacle is in fact in compliance with federal code according to the ADA, which means that this is 14 inches or so, give or take a little bit more, above the ground. So if you know how big a hammer is, you'll know where your receptacles are, because here's the deal, you cannot have 6 feet of wall space without a receptacle. So you got a receptacle here, you got 6 feet going that way, and then you're going to find the next one. Now you have certain exceptions to the code if you're changing rooms, if you're in a certain kind of hallway, but if that's the case, then it has to be 6 feet within a doorway. So if you have a long hallway and you have a series of doorways, you have to have a receptacle within 6 feet. And technically it counts if you have receptacles inside the room, because you can run a cable from inside the room into the hallway, right? So that's kind of how that works. But on this end of my hallway, I have a receptacle here because I have an entrance to my right and an entrance to my left. And down the end of the hallway, there's another receptacle, and that's next to my parents' bedroom. And so what that tells you is that it's within 6 feet of the main entranceways of the hallway, and they're all going to be about 14 inches off the ground. So I'm going to show you 3 receptacles in my house and demonstrate that the hammer trick is pretty consistent. Photo 1 demonstrates a 14-inch hammer aligned to a receptacle that is placed over a hardwood floor. There is a strip of white molding framing the lower portion of the wall. Photo 2 demonstrates the same 14-inch hammer aligned to a receptacle that is now placed over a slate tile floor. The wall is part of a decorative faux cabinet that rests next to the front door of the home. Photo 3 demonstrates the same 14-inch hammer aligned to a receptacle that is now placed over a sea foam green carpet floor. There is a strip of molding which is stained a warm burnt umber to contrast the green floor. The wall is white, as is the receptacle. So what we're going to look at now is a countertop receptacle. So this right here is a receptacle that is recessed. I'm in front of a countertop, so in the foreground, my hand, which is kind of opening and closing right now, is touching the edge of the countertop, and it goes back about, give or take, 2 feet to the backsplash. Now this backsplash has a countertop receptacle. So what I want to do is give you some tips and tricks about locating these guys as well. So roughly speaking, code according to the ADA requires a counter receptacle to be between 36 and 48 inches in height. So for example, my kitchen cabinets, which are below the tile countertop here that I'm kind of touching, are 36 inches. And we actually have kind of like, not what would be considered an island, but like an outcropping That's part of our countertop. And this outcropping has its own outlet, and that outlet is within the 36-inch compliance. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of zoom out a little bit, and here we go. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up my ruler. I'm going to tape measure. Now I apologize, this is not an auditory tape measure. I do not have one of those as of yet, but I will be getting one. I'm going to put the ruler on the floor, and I'm going to draw out the feed. And what that's going to tell me is that I am 34 inches from the floor. So actually our cabinets are a little bit less than 36 inches. So if I say it's 34 inches from the floor to the top, and I pinch this down here, got 34 inches, right? Yeah, give or take about 34 inches. I'm now going to measure from the bottom of the backsplash to the top of the receptacle. We have another, roughly speaking, 7 inches. So 34 plus 7, 41 inches, which is within the 36 and 48 inch compliance rating. So sometimes what will happen is, you won't have even metrics for your placements, but they'll still be within that range of tolerance. We're going to talk about a few other things. I like this outlet because it's not visually impaired friendly. That's why I actually like it, because it's a good outlet to demonstrate on. This is an outlet where you would want to use bump dots to tactilely label the outlet. So let's talk about this. This is a GFCI outlet, which stands for Ground Fault Circuit Interrupter. The way it works is that there are 2 buttons that are connected to an internal breaker, and the breaker works by detecting the flow of current coming from the outlet. So American outlets output 120 volts. And think of volts as sort of like water pressure, and think of amps as the actual flow of water. And if you think about electrical current in terms of like a garden hose, it's actually a pretty cool metaphor and comparison, because when you compare amps and volts, you get this thing called watts. So amps and volts multiplied together produce watts. So you'll see things like a vacuum cleaner that says it requires 25 watts, or it requires, whatever. Speakers will require 50 watts. Big 12-inch speakers will require, a certain wattage. So watts is just a multiplicity of amps and volts. And usually what you will get on an appliance is a wattage rating, like the vacuum cleaner might be 25 watts. And you might get volts or amps associated with the wattage rating. And if you know what the volts are, you can divide the value of volts into the wattage and derive the amps. And if they give you the watts and amps, you can derive the voltage by dividing the amps into the watts. And if they give you voltage and amps, you can derive the wattage by multiplying them. That's just some basic electrical stuff. So what I'm doing is I'm preparing to do kind of like what would be the equivalent of a tactile search. I got the GFCI kind of framed in between my hand. I got my thumb on the left side, and I got the palm of my hand on the top, and I'm going to reach down with my finger and find that top nut. Now, usually these kinds of plates will have 2 nuts, one on the top and bottom. That's pretty much standard for GFCI. Outlets that do not have GFCI will usually have either some kind of clip or a bolt in the middle. But in this case, because it's GFCI, it's going to have 2 nuts, one on the top, one on the bottom. So from the top, I know that this, right below me, is the top receptacle. And I know that on the right-hand side is the live, and on the left-hand side is the neutral. And like we said earlier, either one of those can shock you. Technically, you can also be shocked by a poorly wired ground as well. In between the 2 outlets, we are going to have our circuit breaker. We have the top, which is reset, and the bottom, which is test. Now, here's the thing. These outlets are also universally designed. and they actually can be, in some circumstances, installed upside down. And that does happen, and what will happen is the ground will be on top and the prongs will be on bottom, and in that case the right side in a normally aligned GFCI will actually become the left. And so in an upside down GFCI, the left side is live and the right side is neutral, and the ground is center top, and they can be installed upside down. Now normally a right side up GFCI like this one will have the reset as the top middle button, and it will have the test on the bottom. Because this GFCI is currently active, if I push the reset, nothing's going to happen. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to deactivate it by hitting the test. The test is the lower button. This is in a right side up GFCI. The test would be top side on an upside down one of these. So I have deactivated it, and I'm going to do that one more time for you. I have deactivated it, and now I am going to reset it, which is the top button, and I'm going to push it, and there's that popping sound. We're going to do it one more time. So listen to the first pop. This is the test. I'm now holding my little lapel microphone next to it. You're really going to hear this pop. So I'm going to push the test. Okay, so there's a little light on the bottom right hand corner. Again, this is in a right side up GFCI. On an upside down GFCI, this button, this light will be on the top left side. So right side up, bottom right, upside down, top left. Okay, this light, when green, indicates that the GFCI is working normally and is in fact powered. Right now it's off. That means that what's happened is the breaker that's built into the GFCI has been tripped and has deactivated, and I'm going to reset it. You hear that pop, and the light flashes red, then turns green. Okay, let's talk about what some of that means. Okay, so in a normally installed GFCI, the top right will have the 120 volts leaving the outlet. It will travel to the neutral prong. The neutral prong has a means of detecting the voltage that is leaving the live right side. Again, this is in a normal facing GFCI, not upside down. Now what's going to happen is if there is a short, that means that 120 volts is coming out, but say only 90 volts is going in. Or more commonly, let's say you're using a hair dryer that's using, say, 100 volts and only 90 are going back into the neutral. The GFCI will detect this, that there's a spillage happening somewhere, and it will trip, and it will activate the breaker and disengage the switch.